Hi, everyone. We are the hosts of Like Mother, Like Murder, a true crime momcast.
You heard that right. We are a momcast, which is our unique twist in the true crime world.
What sets us aside is that our content is mainly mom-related, from missing moms to murdered moms.
To moms who committed the crime, survivors, and more.
We are getting started on our third season with over 100 episodes that you guys can go and binge. I am Rachel.
And I'm Heather. We drop new episodes every Tuesday wherever you get your podcasts at Like Mother,
Like Murder.
Last week, we started our coverage of the Pennsylvania coal mine fire that's been burning under the ground near a deserted town called Centralia for over 60 years. There are several theories of how the fire started, but the most widely accepted theory is that the fire started in the landfill located in an abandoned strip mine. However, whether that fire was intentionally set to deal with the rats and smells before the town's Memorial Day celebration, or if it was accidental, is up for debate. We discussed how one author, David DeCock, unearthed receipts showing that the firefighters had been paid for services on the day in question, strongly suggesting that the fire may have been intentional because they had the fire department there on standby. However, the town council's minutes do not record their plans to light the fire at the dump, and this may be because it was illegal to do so at the time according to state law in Pennsylvania. Since the definition of arson in Pennsylvania does not require malicious intent, only recklessness, that would make any intentionally lit fire at the dump a possible arson. Even if it's not arson, it is still a violation of the law. Ergo, if the fire started because of intentional burning at the strip mine, a crime was committed, a crime for which no one has been held accountable to my knowledge. However, the local, state, and federal government did hold accountability for protecting the citizens of Centralia from the fire. We know this fire still burns today in 2025, so we know that they failed to execute those responsibilities. It's easy to look back today and see all of the missteps along the way in hindsight, but were the decisions made during the disastrous spread of the fire negligent, given what officials knew at the time of the fire? Well, I'm leaving that up to you. This is the continuing saga of the Centralia, Pennsylvania mine fire on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And as always, I'm Griffin, 14th century time traveler, here to navigate the modern podcast through my dreams.
Please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, X, and Facebook. Also, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Anytime you see content from us, if you give it a like, leave a comment, share it with your friends, that goes a really long way in helping us grow and find our audience. Growing a podcast is hard work, and any effort you make to help us grow is very much appreciated. Podcasting is not free. Court records are quite expensive, and we're not asking for money. We're just asking for you to help us grow. If you'd like to help us grow by plastering our logo all over your body, you can do that now. We have shirts, hoodies, tank tops, sweatshirts, aprons, hats, all kinds of other things in our merch shop on Spreadshop, which you can find a link to on our website, www.crimetoburn.com, or in today's show notes.
Our logo also makes a great tattoo.
If you get our logo tattooed on you, send me a picture.
Especially a face tattoo.
I have knocked our profits on merch down to just a few dollars per item, so hopefully you can find something that you love that's in your price range. A couple people did ask me about stickers. There are some sticker designs on there now, and I'll be adding some additional ones in the coming days. If you have not yet left us a 5-star rating and written review on your podcast platform of choice, we humbly request that you do so as soon as possible. In fact, you can pause this and go do it right now. We'll wait. Those reviews and ratings are incredibly important to tell the platforms to suggest us to new people, which again gets back to helping us grow. So thank you kindly to those of you that have consistently been interacting with any of our social media content, and for those of you that have left reviews and ratings, you are our MVPs. I read every single comment and review we get, so thank you. And finally, send us your constructive feedback, your comments on our episodes, your own fire stories, or your recommendations for future cases to crimetoburn@gmail.com. And now we must address one more thing before we get back to the story. I just want to clear a couple things up. Someone came at me this week on one of our social media accounts, and I just want to put it out there. If you think that anything I've said either on social media or in an episode isn't accurate, please, for the love of jelly beans, email me or DM me. I check these accounts daily, but I want to make one thing clear. All of my sources are always in the show notes, and if you have different information, I can only present that different information if you agree to be a source, meaning that I have to actually be able to verify that you are who you say you are, or that you would have had access to this information. And there's a lot of different ways that I can do that. There's things like census records, and, I have contacts that I've interviewed for the show. Tons of ways that I can do that. But even if I use you as an anonymous source, which I can do, I have to be confident that I know who you are. And if you have different information, I want to share that information, but I can't do it if you won't communicate with me. But nothing I've presented anywhere in this case or on any of our social media accounts is my theory. I am presenting you with sourced information from research other people have done, other theories that are out there, so that I can dissect the theories, review what evidence exists, and give you the information so you can decide what you think is true and what you think is not true. But if you come at me on one of our social media accounts and I'm like, oh, whoa, hey, let's talk, and you go radio silent, I can't do anything to address your concerns. And finally, I didn't realize everyone didn't understand this, but I can only use images taken by other people with their permission. So when I post ads and stuff on social media, sometimes I use stock photography that is a representation of something. So like I posted a video that showed a small town and somebody called me out and said, that's not even Centralia. And I'm like, I know I don't have copyright permission to use any videos of Centralia. So just to be completely transparent, I'm not using images from the actual cases in a lot of those videos. I'm using stock photography that I have a license to use. Just like when you watch a true crime documentary and there's a bloody knife on the floor, that's not the actual bloody knife they use, that's a prop. I didn't think I had to clear that up, but apparently I do.
Well, sometimes when someone says Earth calling someone, they don't really mean that they're in outer space and that the Earth is actually calling them.
Matilda.
Calling them Matilda, calling them Susan, it doesn't matter.
But now that I've cleared that up, if you guys do see the comments that I'm talking about, please don't tear into anybody. I am hoping that this person reconsiders and will reach out to me. But I just wanted to put it out there on the episode. None of this is my theory or my opinion. I am dissecting the theories and opinions of others. You can always email me, crimetoburn@gmail.com. All right, so back to the good stuff. Last week, we covered the theory that the fire was started at the dump in the strip mine, and that one of the holes in the wall of the strip mine was either missed or overlooked. And we can't rule out that this was negligence, but that's nothing more than a potential unprovable probability. Or sorry, not even probability, but possibility. Based on some interviews with the mine inspector that David decocted when he was researching his book, it seems possible that there may have been some knowledge that not all the holes were completely sealed. And again, this comes from the book that David DeCock wrote. It's in the show notes. It's a great book. You should definitely check it out.
What's he admitting to exactly?
Well,
his name is DeCock, but not all the holes are sealed.
No, it was the mine inspector that David DeCock talked to. And he said that in his interviews, there was sort of like a knowing, like, look to the side, and he was like, we knew there were still holes. We knew that. And I got the impression that sealing mine holes isn't like an exact science. Like, because they're taking openings in the earth and they're filling them with basically clay. So I think that what he's saying is the holes they knew about, they did the best they could to seal. But I think he's saying possibly that there may have been other holes that they either didn't see, didn't know about, or they didn't look real hard to find. So the theory that the fire started in the dump is the most widely accepted theory, but it's not the only theory, and we are going to cover the others as we go, so just hold tight. But then we talked about why this particular fire is so tough to put out. We talked about the physics of mine fires, the chemical reactions, all that sciencey stuff. I'm not going to go through it all again. And then I told you that the best way to deal with a mine fire is to head it off and dig out the coal ahead of it like a fire break. However, this requires expediency, and that expediency was a missed opportunity in the Centralia fire. And I ended by suggesting that there were some big government-y reasons for that missed opportunity. So that's where we're going to pick up today, and then we'll be circling back to some of the theories of the fire. Now, as we go through this, keep in mind, it's really easy today in 2025 to look back and see how decisions contributed to the fire outrunning the efforts to control it. But keep in mind that back in 1962 and the years immediately following, that they didn't have this privilege of hindsight that we have today. Instead, they were trying to make decisions about what to do without the full knowledge of the scope of the disaster at the time, nor did they have full knowledge of the potential detrimental impacts, or at least not everybody did. It's reasonable to presume that they knew bad things would happen if they failed to control the fire, but we don't know if anyone or who fully grasped exactly how bad things could get. And some of the people that understood that may not have been in the position to make these decisions. So I want to keep that in mind as we plow ahead, that we're looking back on this in hindsight. It's really easy to judge actions that were taken, but in the moment when it was an emergency and people were trying to make decisions with incomplete information, were these decisions negligent or not?
Yeah, that's rough. It's a rough call.
It is. It's 1962. The city council has just been informed that the firefighting efforts using the bulldozer revealed this hole in the north wall of the strip mine turned landfill. The city council knows that they were told by the inspector to seal up all the holes, and they did sign a contract and pay a contractor to do that work. But it's now become painfully obvious that we have a big problem and we're going to need help. So people start doing people-y things and contacting other people. At this point, the residents of Centralia know they have a dump fire, but it seems that the knowledge that this could be spreading into a mine fire is limited to a certain number of people. However, dump fires that burn for days and weeks on end are bound to start irking anyone and everyone that lives and works downwind. And while they may not know about the hole and the potential involvement of the abandoned coal mine, in small towns, it doesn't take bad news very long to start traveling. So I suspect at this point, people are starting to talk, rumors are starting to happen, that there might be a bigger problem. So enter Centralia resident Elmer Wills. Now recall, this fire was set around Memorial Day, so it would have been May 27th that the fire was set, if it was set. It's now late June, so this fire's been burning for a month. And Elmer is really concerned. He's concerned enough to write a letter to the State Secretary of Mines. So the State Secretary of Mines, he is concerned, so he reaches out to the local inspector. That's what he should do. And that local inspector is a man named George, and I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but I'm going to try. Sigaritas? That's my best guess. Sigaritas. But George Sigaritas is the inspector. He's the one that initially identified the holes and told the city council to fill them before they started operating this landfill. So the Secretary of Mines sends this letter to his office telling him he needs to investigate this, but when the letter is received by his office, George is on vacation. So somebody else in his office opens the letter, and they send return correspondence on July 6th telling the state that they already knew about the dump fire, George is on vacation, but they know that before he left, the city had hired a bulldozer to take care of the fire. It's taken care of, it's out, you don't have to worry about this anymore. This was obviously not the case. So after a lot of doing nothing for a month, someone here is at least trying to get some attention going. That good intention leads to a miscommunication that leads to further delay. It seems the city council, once they became aware of this opening, that they didn't do anything. And this is sort of like that remove uniform, mingle with crowd joke I told last week. And I feel like when the dump fire kept igniting, I feel like the city council kind of hoped that their fire department was just inept and they didn't have a bigger problem. But they really buried their heads in the ground on this one. And it's never a good idea to bury your head in the ground in the face of a potential crisis, especially
when it's on fire.
When the ground's on fire. So this dump fire is becoming a big enough nuisance that town residents, including this one that writes the letter to the Secretary of Mines, are starting to get upset, and it's been a month now that this fire is burning. Then we have this miscommunication, and so we're just pissing more time away here. So the town council meets again on July 6th, and at this meeting, 2 council members resigned. And one of them claimed it was for a medical issue, but no reason was given for the other resignation. But the man that resigned's name was Michael Jurgill, and he was the councilman in charge of fire department matters. So a lot of questions have been raised in some of the sources that I used as to whether or not these resignations were actually due to unrelated reasons, or if these people realized that they had authorized a fire that had caused a big problem and they were worried about legal repercussions. And we'll probably never know the answer to that question, but it's not outside the realm of possibilities. I'm sure that this July meeting of the city council was full of anxiety, but following the meeting, one of the council members called a man named Clarence Kashner, who was president of the Independent Miners, Brakemen, and Truckers. Now, this man was often called in to help when there was emergency mine fires, and he was willing to help here. So he phoned a man named Gordon Smith at DMMI, which is the Department of Mining and Mineral Industries. And he told him that, look, we have a problem, and I have the tools and equipment, and so I'll just go up there and I'll dig out the fire for $175. And this was in 1962, so in today's money, that would be about $1,800. Not a huge financial outlay. But Smith told him that, look, his hands were tied. According to state law, he couldn't just approve this proposal. All the things had to go through the state bidding process, blah, blah, blah. Now, this made Kashner super angry, and he told Smith, like, you can't delay this. The more you delay it, the more expensive it's going to get, and it's going to get harder to control. But Smith's like, hey, my hands are tied. There's government procurement rules that I have to follow. But I find it shocking that there is no available emergency fund that somebody could have approved such a small amount of money to address what was at this point not a huge problem. Finally, Segaratus comes home from vacation and he heads to Centralia to do his monthly inspection of the landfill, and he is now horrified. This fire has been burning for about a month and a half, and he realizes when he gets there that we have a big problem because he sees steam curling out of the fissures in the north wall of the pit. So he calls another state mine inspector and has them bring gas detection equipment, and they do readings, and they know now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the mines are definitely on fire. They can tell from the gas readings. So a month and a half of inaction, an easy fix that's been foregone because of government procurement rules, and as a result, the city council is now informed that they have a mine fire. So they call a special meeting on July 25th, and 2 things happened as a result of this meeting. The first is that the city council informed Lehigh Valley Coal Company of the fire. Lehigh Valley Coal Company owned the mine that was on fire, but they basically were acting just as a landlord. They were not in the business of mining anymore. They owned all this mine equipment, and they subleased all of their mineral rights to smaller organizations. So they didn't have the mine equipment to go in and fight the fire, and they said they didn't have the resources to go in and fight the fire. The second letter sent as a result of this meeting was to the same guy that our buddy Elmer wrote to, the State Secretary of Mines. Only in this letter, they specifically say that the fire started accidentally during a period of hot weather, and they asked the DMMI to step in to put the fire out. So this is the second theory that we're going to talk about of how the mine fire started, which is the accident theory. Now, many people are probably thinking fires don't just randomly start, and this is so silly, but not so fast. Fires in dumps and refuse piles are not super unusual, and this is because you have a lot of decaying matter. And decay tends to be an exothermic reaction, and you can get spontaneous heating that gets hot enough at certain places to eventually lead to smoldering and then flaming ignition. So you do get a lot of fires in trash and refuse piles. And if you think about this, just look at your steaming pile of compost in the winter. That's the same type of reaction. It's a decaying reaction, and that's why people stir their compost piles. But it's not just dumps and refuse piles and compost. Things like piles of wood chips, piles of sawdust, and oil-soaked rags, which is a common cause of fire. These things, as they decay, cause exothermic reactions that can cause spontaneous heating and spontaneous fire. So it's not impossible that this was an accidental fire. But the letter says that the fire started on June 25th, which is nearly a month after initial reports of the fire starting. Why would the town council say it was accidental if it possibly wasn't? Were they maybe feeling a little bit scared about being charged for allowing a dump fire since it was against state law? And as for the date being listed as June 25th, when we know the fire was first identified around Memorial Day, is it possible that they were trying to cover up for the fact that they did approve an illegal dump fire, and in case it was ever found out, they wanted to say that this fire started at a completely different time over a month later? It's possible, but again, we're probably never going to know for sure. And while I can't disprove the accidental spontaneous heating theory, I can't prove it either. But this is one theory of the fire, and it is possible, although in my mind it's not probable. For me, there's a lot of evidence here that points to the actions that the town council took or didn't take immediately following the fire. And then when they finally did start acting, they appear to provide information that we know can be refuted by many residents in the town. So to me, this seems like they're trying to cover their butts a little bit. And for me, that makes it seem more probable that the fire did start from a planned controlled burn.
CYA is standard procedure.
And, you know, maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe we should just take our lumps.
I think we honestly should.
I do too. Now, one of the city council members didn't think that it was a dump fire or spontaneous heating that started the fire. It seems that way back in 1932, there was another fire started in one of the underground mines by an explosion. And according to local legend, it said that it was never fully extinguished. And some postulate that it could have continued burning for over 30 years and eventually reached this landfill and spread to the trash, which is what caused it to finally be discovered.
That might have been a hard theory to swallow at first, but now that it's ready to collect Social Security...
Well, I'm going to poke a hole in it. Frank Jerkel Sr. swears this isn't possible. And he swears it isn't possible because he admits to illegal activity for how he knows it isn't possible, which to me makes it more believable. He reports that he and his brother operated a bootleg mine in the vicinity of the landfill between 1960 and 1962, so the 2 years leading up to this fire, and that they couldn't have been down there in those tunnels if the fire was spreading from that older fire toward the landfill. He said they would have been right in the middle of the fire, and even if the fire was spreading slow, they would have been exposed to the toxic gases and carbon monoxide, and it would have killed them. So I feel like the fact that he's admitting to doing something illegal here makes the story more credible for me.
Criminals are just easier to believe. I get it.
Now, I don't believe that this was an old mine fire that spread. To me, the evidence just supports that the city council authorized the dump fire and that dump fire spread to the mine. We have receipts paying the firefighters for standby, and Joseph Skovak, a member of the Centralia Fire Company in 1962, confirmed to David DeCock in interviews that he recalls the fire company setting a fire in the landfill that spring. However, he also said that he doesn't believe that the dump fire could have burned down to the hole that ignited the coal seam. He said he thought that the hole was too deep in the garbage for that to happen within a week. But I gotta say, I think it's possible. But before we get back to the missteps taken in dealing with the fire, there's one more theory to present. And this is the theory of Joan Quigley, and it's presented in her book,
Quigley Down Under.
The Day the Earth Caved In, which is close. Her sources for this theory are based on interviews with a townsperson. A townsperson that honestly comes across a little bit like a Karen. I'm just saying how she was presented in the book. Kind of a busybody type of person. So according to her theory in her book, in Centralia on May 26th, that was one of the days that the city had hired a commercial hauler named Curly Stoslevich to come and pick up trash. And as part of that trash pickup, residents would take the ashes from their coal-burning stoves, put them in a galvanized metal container, set them out on the street, and the hauler would pick those up with the trash. So she thinks that it was ashes that were still hot from one of these coal ash disposals that actually was dumped in the landfill and ignited the fire. However, we know from multiple townspeople that the city council appears to have paid firefighters to stand by on the 28th or the 27th. I think it was the 27th. That was a day later. Why would you have a standby for a planned fire if the fire had been ignited? It was already on fire the day before. You wouldn't.
Unless you figure out a way to go back in time.
You know what? I haven't fully explored the time travel theory. Now, according to David DeCock's book, firefighters were not paid for responding to emergency calls. They were only paid if they were doing standby. And so the fact that we have receipts for that day shows that we were doing standby. And like I said, why would we do standby for a planned burn if the dump was already on fire from the day before? Doesn't make any sense to me.
That's just really good planning. You're planning a day late for something that happened a day ago.
Oh, okay. Is that what it is? So while I could believe this scenario is maybe possible on the outside edge of possible, I think that the evidence and the eyewitness accounts of a controlled burn that day are a lot more possible and probable. But I'm not here to tell you what to believe, only to present those theories and the evidence that exists. You decide. I also think the fact that the Centralia City Council seems to be dragging its feet in procuring help to deal with the fire may be a reflection of their hesitance to bring too much attention to themselves. What they should have been doing, and again, this is in hindsight, so it's easy to say what they should have done from here, but they should have been making all the noise they could to get help the second they realized what happened.
This same kind of thing happens in a lot of different crimes.
It does. Segaratus returned from vacation, realized the scope of the fire, had the gases measured. We now know the mine's on fire. He raises the alarm. The Deputy Secretary of Mines, James Schober Sr., is now aware of the issue, and the council members in Centralia obviously thought or hoped that he would have the latitude to make something happen to bail them out of this mess. And he did arrange a meeting in August with the owner of the abandoned mine and all the organizations that leased mineral rights from them. And basically, my understanding of this meeting was everyone got together to sort of go, not it. Schober announces during this meeting that he did expect the state to approve a project to dig out the fire, and that they anticipated this would cost about $30,000. Now, this is a pretty big jump from the $175 that the first guy offered to do it. But what's shocking is that in this same meeting, there was a man named Alonzo Sanchez, and he said, look, I have all the equipment, everything we need to dig out this fire. I'm a strip mine operator already. I've got the men, I've got the equipment, I've got everything. He said, I'll do it. And all I ask is that you let me keep whatever coal I dig out without having to pay royalties to Lehigh Valley or any of the people that had leased rights.
Let me see if I got this right. Sanchez is saying it's a dirty job, but Sanchez can do it.
That's what he's saying. He's saying he'll do it for free. All he wants is to keep the coal.
He's saying his dirty Sanchez is free.
Yeah. So, under his proposal, what he planned to do was drill boreholes to find the extent of the fire. And then from those boreholes, he would be able to tell how much coal was there and if it would be worth his while to donate his services to dig out the fire. But Schober and others in the meeting decided that they would rather spend $30,000 and bid this out according to state regulations. That was better than free. Now, in the interest of fairness, they may have been concerned that drilling boreholes would slow down the response. Or maybe they thought that if he drilled the boreholes and then found out that there wasn't going to be enough coal to cover his costs, that he might have backed out and they would have wasted all this time. Maybe they had anxiety over legal quabbles over the mining rights that could upend the project. This guy's offering to do it for free. So what happens if his equipment breaks down or if something goes wrong and he stops and now they've wasted all this time that they could have been getting a legit government contract in place to cover it? And they lose their footing. So I don't know anything about this guy. Maybe he wasn't a reliable person. Maybe they already knew this about him. I don't know. But I want to give them some benefit of the doubt in saying that this decision probably had in their mind at the time a rational explanation for why it didn't seem like the way to go.
Well, rationality is a little bit subjective, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So I don't think that their decision not to take him up on this offer constitutes negligence. I think it just highlights the difficulties of trying to make decisions in an emergency when you're working without the full picture of all the information. You're working with limited information. Unfortunately, they were very wrong. So very, very wrong. Now, there were operational mines in the Centralia area at this time, and the mine inspectors were now monitoring those mines very carefully because the most deadly byproducts of a mine fire are the gases, including carbon monoxide. So they're monitoring these other mines' air quality. And on August 9th, inspectors detected increased carbon monoxide levels in these active and working mines and closed all of them, which put somewhere between 200 and 300 miners out of work. Understandably, these miners demanded quick action by the state. So the state authorized a project to deal with the mine fire, and they opened bids on August 17th, and they accepted a bid for $20,000 to dig out the fire, and the work began. Now, they didn't at this point know for sure where the fire had spread to, and so the ideal plan would have been to use boreholes to determine the extent of the fire before they started digging. But it seems that in the rush to get these miners back to work, DMMI decided that exploratory drilling was out of the question. It was going to take too long. And so they were going to make estimates about where they should drill, and they gave the contractor plans for where to drill and told them that they weren't permitted to deviate from those plans. So this plan was to excavate 24,000 cubic yards of earth and to start at the north rim of the dump pit and work outwards. However, as the coal vein moved north, it sloped at a very steep angle downward, meaning that as the fire moved northward, it was going deeper and deeper underground and would require more and more digging to get to it. The DMMI, because they had a limited budget here, was really concerned with going over budget before they got the work done. So in order to help control costs, they prohibited the contractor from working any of his men on overtime. They were only permitted to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, no holidays, no weekends. And while I understand that they were trying not to run out of money, they were putting too much emphasis on controlling costs and not enough emphasis on speed.
That's what pencil pushers do.
By the time the project ran out of budget, the contractor had excavated more than double the original estimated amount of earth at a whopping 58,580 cubic yards.
Well, he was motivated, right?
So this project started in August, and it died on October 29th as a failure. The fire had gone past where they were digging, and there was no point in continuing the project. Ultimately, DMMI cited the failure to do exploratory drilling as a major reason for the project's failure. And again, we can talk about hindsight, but there is a large number of miners out of work, and miners had unions, and unions can get really loud. And so they were probably pounding on the DMMI just to get somebody up there and digging. And I think they were afraid that taking the time to actually dig these boreholes to find the extent of the fire would have angered the miners' union even more when they just wanted somebody to be digging.
I think that if we really tried, we could reroute the Atlantic Ocean and give the devil's asshole a high colonic.
Now, by this point, with the state involved, the city council is very much hands-off. Their position is, this is the state's ballgame now. We don't have any jurisdiction to interfere. And this hands-off approach is proven through city council meeting minutes because they don't mention the fire at any time between October of 1962 and September of 1964. So 2 years. The city council never mentions the fire in any of their meetings.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't either.
So the DMMI approves a second project, and this began in October of 1962 within days of the first project being shut down, and this is a flushing project. Now, the idea of a flushing project is to smother the fire by blocking oxygen and to create physical barriers with crushed rock mixed with water that can be pumped down into the mine ahead of the fire. Now, getting rocks was easy. There's piles of culm everywhere. Culm's a byproduct of processing anthracite coal. It's a mixture of teeny tiny coal particles mixed with coarse rock and soil. But to pump it into the mine, it has to be mixed with water. And while culm was plentiful, the municipal water supply in Centralia was not up to the task of delivering the massive quantities of water that this project required.
They're pumping a shaft into a hole until you get the culm out.
Well, no, the culm's already there on top of the ground. So they're mixing the culm with water, and they're pumping it into a hole to fill a shaft.
That is a little counterintuitive, but I'll let it go.
So the state accepted a bid of $28,400. Even though that their estimates were that they expected the project to cost up to $40,000, they accepted the low bidder. You don't always do the best job accepting the lowest bid, by the way. But I didn't get to review bids, so I can't comment on that.
A lot of times when you take the lowest bid, you just got to do it again. It doesn't turn out to be the lowest bid in the long run.
It doesn't. So the way this works is they were to drill boreholes, but not to find the extent of the fire. They were to use these boreholes to pump the calm water mixture in, and the intent is to fill the shaft completely all the way up to the ceiling, so they're essentially creating a wall inside these hollow mine tunnels. So these walls will do two things. Number one, they'll help block off oxygen to the fire, and two, they serve as a barrier for the fire. And plus, since they're pumping a lot of water in there, it's assumed that even if they're over top of an area where some of the fire has spread, not the main seat of the fire, but some fire spread, that the water is going to help extinguish any little fires that may have spread, since they're supposed to be working ahead of the fire. The plan was to drill the holes in a semicircle at the edge of the dump pit, and then drill a new hole every 20 feet and begin pumping in this calm water mixture. But it turned out as they started this, they realized that they were actually drilling right into the heart of the fire. They were not ahead of it.
This is weirdly erotic.
As we discussed, steam is necessary in the gasification process of anthracite to create hydrogen gas. So now we're introducing steam. And people that were there reported that as they're trying to pump this water calm mixture in, that they were basically creating all these explosions. They would have little volcanoes that would burst up through the ground. So they were definitely not ahead of the fire. They were in the fire.
When the earth is a squirter.
So ultimately, this plan to start at the edge of the dump pit was not the intent, according to DMMI. According to them, they had intended that this work be done ahead of the fire, which makes sense. That's how this was supposed to be done. And by December, it had become obvious to DMMI that this project was in big trouble. They'd already had so many setbacks. At one point, their drill bit melted and got stuck in the earth. They had an especially cold winter. They even had a blizzard that year. Their water lines kept freezing. Even the machine that ground the calm so it could be pumped froze. But that wasn't even the biggest issue.
Are you just trying to find the maximum amount of innuendo that you can put into a story?
No.
You're doing great. If that was your goal, I don't see how you could have packed that any further.
So the biggest issue was that as they worked, DMMI inspectors reportedly had some fears that they were going to run out of calm before they finished.
Everyone's fear. Every man's fear.
So when they felt that they were having to pump too much of the material into any single borehole, the contractor claims that they were told by inspectors not to finish filling that hole and instead to stop and move on to the next hole. And this is a problem. The way this is supposed to work is by creating an impenetrable barrier of rock that fills the entire shaft from floor to ceiling. So if they're not filling every borehole all the way up, then they're leaving gaps and they're leaving a pathway through which the fire can progress. And I don't understand why inspectors believed that they could make this a successful project without completely filling up every borehole. My only guess is that maybe they felt that they were putting enough flushing material directly into the mine fire, since they weren't really ahead of it, that maybe they thought that they were actually putting the fire out as they worked. I'm not really sure. But by March 15th, 1963, the flushing project ran out of money and it was terminated. In total, the cost had run up to $42,420, which is a far cry from that low bid of $28,400. After 2 failures, Gordon Smith refused to give up. And he got an engineering study of the fire, and he came up with 3 different alternative plans and budgets to deal with the fire to present to the state. And as he was working to do this, the fire burned through its first anniversary. And Gordon Smith did get authorization for another project to control the Centralia mine fire, and this time he fully intended to personally supervise the work himself to ensure that bad decisions didn't jeopardize the outcome, as appeared to happen in the first 2 attempts. But then billionaire Howard Hughes and President John F. Kennedy were suddenly enmeshed in a coal mine disaster, but not the coal mine disaster jeopardizing the town of Centralia. And this other coal mine disaster captured the entire nation's attention. And it's the reason Gordon Smith ended up leaving the third Centralia project site before it was complete. And once again, in his absence, mistakes were made. Were they mistakes that Gordon Smith could have prevented? Well, that's impossible to say with certainty, but it sure seems that one thing is a given. Without him there, bad decisions had already prevailed, and each of those bad decisions contributed another pen stroke to the tragic ending of Centralia's story. And that's where we're going to pick up next week.
I'm a little sniffly. I'm sniffly.
Sorry, I got lost in thought. I'm back.
It sounds like a blessing to me to be interrupted from a true crime podcast.
What if I can solve the crime? Did you ever think about that?
All the time.
What if I committed the crime?
I try not to think about that.
I gotta know what they know about me, so I can stay one step ahead. I'm a terrible liar. I don't think you can be a good criminal and be a terrible liar.
If they were such good criminals, how would you be talking about them?
And he had taken a bunch of Valium and drank a bunch of alcohol before he broke in, so while he was robbing her, he got tired and decided to crawl under her bed and take a nap, which is where he still was when she found him, sleeping under her bed.
Sometimes you just get too comfortable with your profession. You know, you think you're just better at it than you are. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. I kind of want to believe that people who do nefarious things to other people are dumb. I want to believe smart people wouldn't do that. Well, I just imagine you'd have to be pretty organized to fence stolen museum things, right? Where do you sell that?
I don't know. I don't know how to get to the black market. People always talk about the black market. When I was little, I remember asking my dad where it was. He was like, what? Oh, I just have the wrong friends?
Heisters. I didn't say wrong.
Oh, okay.
I said different.
I don't know what to do now.
Like maybe swinger weird.
Oh, that's too weird. Are we talking about the same couple? And now I'm bored. This conversation has run its course and now it's work.
At no time did I think that was functioning mechanism. What's flapping on my shoe?
You got the flappy laces.
No one ever did teach me how to tie my shoe.
An author, David DeCock, unearthed... Damn it. I knew I wasn't going to get through that sentence. Strongly suggesting that the fire may have been intentional. Okay.
What that is when you're camping out on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You're intentional.
Intentional? Okay.
On purpose in a tent.
My inbox is open.
Only for me. You know how when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail?
Mm-hmm.
When you're DeCock, everything looks like a hole.
Oh my god. DeCock was the author, though, and not the mine inspector, but he did spend a lot of time talking about holes in the book. And shafts.
Yeah. I had a suspicion.
That was so magical. Thanks for sharing that with me.
Isn't that amazing? There's a lot of stuff you still don't know about me. I keep dragging my junk all over that couch when no one's looking.
I was just pausing there for a beat. And then you looked like you were processing.
Yep. Yeah, well, when in doubt, blame a random citizen that can't be identified. No, you got an angle of a shaft happening, something declining. I don't know whether to throw Viagra at this or just to run away. Did you hear what you just said?
The coal vein.
The main vein.
Angled steeply downward.
Oh! Yeah, I need a Viagra.
Oh, I get it now.
It was just a lot to not make a ton of innuendo, and I couldn't even decide how to approach it, honestly.
Oh, okay. So
it was
that was
so tightly packed. It was really me because I didn't tighten it like a man. This looks like softcore.
It does not.
It does too. Look, it depends on how you read it. Look. So when they felt that they were having to pump too much material into one borehole, the contractor claims they were told not to finish. Stop and move on to the next. But this whole plan depends on this comb creating a barrier from floor to ceiling of the mine shaft. Were you just like when you wrote this?
No, it never occurred to me that you would interpret any of this like that. Which I should know better by now.
I don't think the pyro and episode had this much innuendo. And it's supposed to be a easy edit, quickie, get through it. So I'm doing my best, but I'm just like a pressure cooker in my brain here.
Is it supposed to be forming an impenetrable barrier?
It's one thing to be an idiot, but to be an idiot and know you're an idiot and not be able to do anything about it. I was just thinking, we're doing more than just reporting on fire crime. We're trying to give the listeners a reason to make love.
Yeah, that was not my thought process while writing this, but if you feel so inspired.
Come back, Shane.
Is he the only person that's capable of making good decisions? Because that's what it feels like.
So we got George Costanza and Gordon Ramsay going at it.
That's not
hot and heavy.
What I said at all.
If you're a therapist, call me. I don't know if I've ever made a good cake. I have pieces in museums.
I know.
I can't make a damn birthday cake. We make them because they're good, not because they're good.
Yeah, we put him to sleep last time.
Which is part of the benefit of this channel. If you need to go to sleep and be awakened by erogenous stories of shafts and holes, this is not a metaphorical pup tent. It makes me sweaty, and sweaty makes you cold.
I don't know. I don't sweat.
And that's because you were born without pores. No pores, no navel.
I have a belly button. We talked about this.
Technically, but you gotta like make air quotes when you say that. If you were to pour some liquid in there and then extract that liquid with, say, a syringe, how many cc's of liquid do you think you'd have?
I don't know.
I don't think one.
That's not true. You could definitely get a cc in my belly button.
Let's lay out on the floor, get my syringe. Yeah, we're just measuring your belly button, baby. Don't worry.
What makes this even better is that we have company this weekend.
I like to traumatize my company, though. Because I really like having people over, but I don't want to come back too soon. I want them to have to take time to forget certain things before they can come back.
I feel like we probably accomplished that in most cases.
I feel successful.
Yeah. Which listener do you think's hot?
All of them.
That's a good place to end it.
I'll see you in your dreams.
I'm Mandy.
And I'm Avery.
We're the hosts and creators of Thick Thighs and Creepy Vibes.
Join us as we take a deep dive into the macabre and the unexplained.
Listen every Wednesday as we take you on a chilling journey that transports you to all corners of the Great White North.
Let's boot those Sunday scaries while we take a rip into the harrowing tales of the haunted and the supernatural phenomena that defy explanation.
So grab your ketchup chips
And your Caesars and make sure to
creep it real.